Hello, this is Father David here on Clean Tuesday, day 2 of Great Lent 2025. We continue on into steps 2 and 3 of the ladder of divine ascent. Step 2 is entitled On Detachment, and then step 3 is on exile or pilgrimage. And today in our reading we're going to cover both of these, but just a general idea. Detachment, of course, meaning from a need for earthly temporal things. Now, it's fine and indeed needed to use earthly temporal things properly for the glory of God and for the benefit of all. But, of course, we tend to want, desire, eventually need those people or things or relationships or securities, whatever they happen to be, until they become a kind of idol. They become something that, we cannot imagine our lives without these things, without these people, without these relationships, without this identity, whatever it happens to be. And so St. John is calling for the monks. Now, they are to detach and go off into the wilderness and live in these, either in solitary, as hermits, or with one or two other monks, or in a community. Cenobitic monasteries, it's called. But, again, as we've said, we are all called to identify those things that we have become too attached to, and use Great Lent to detach. But it's interesting because in both of these chapters, what I'm choosing to focus on is the role of demonic suggestion. Now, lest we get too dramatic about all of this, I'm not talking about Hollywood demonic possession with heads turning around and crawling on the ceiling, all right? Actual demonic influence is usually much more subtle. And truly, if one is a baptized Orthodox Christian, there is not, for a person to completely give themselves over to apostatize. Of course you could. But what the demon's primary influence is St. John says in one part, we won't belabor that part, but the demons can see things that are occurring in the world, in real time, in presence. They don't know what's happening in the future, but they can come to people in dreams, in fantasies, and suggest these things and give people a sense of, clairvoyance or some kind of deceptive gift. Or it could also be just simply suggestions of the possibility of glory, of prosperity, of all of these things. But the demonic influence comes both to those of us living in the world and to those who are living in monasteries. And it's important because one of the main suggestions, regardless of the life of the person involved, is that the grass is always greener on the other side. If you're a monk, the demons will suggest, leave the monastery and go back into the world. And if you're in the world, the demons will often suggest, if we were just, free of all these distractions and I lived in a monastery and could pray all the time, it would be better and different. There's a women's monastery in Elwood City, Pennsylvania, Holy Transfiguration, where Mother Christophora, the abbess, one time said that a woman came to her and said, I just feel like God is calling me to monasticism. Oh, well, tell me about your life. And it came out that she had, like 2 or 3 teenage children. And Mother Christophora says, darling, that's not a calling, that's a temptation, right? To leave and abandon the responsibilities that you have. But he says, I'm going to start in step 2, chapter 2, section 3. After our renunciation of the world, the demons suggest to us that we should envy those living in the world. Of course, he's talking about the monks are tempted. These people in the world who give alms and console the needy and be sorry for ourselves as deprived of these virtues. The aim of our foes is, by false humility, either to make us return to the world, or, if we remain monks, to plunge us into despair. It is possible to belittle those living in the world out of conceit, and it is also possible to disparage them behind their backs in order to avoid despair and to obtain hope. So there's this sense, I wish I were doing more practical work out in the world to really help people instead of just being here in the monastery and praying. And then otherwise, he says then, same chapter 2, section 7, we need to have great vigilance in all things, but we must give our whole attention to this above everything else. I have seen many people in the world who, by reason of cares, worries, occupations, and vigils, avoided the wild desires of the body. In other words, that can sometimes be the case, that really all the stuff we have to do, we may think it's getting in the way of us, but really it's saving us from being alone with our thoughts and obsessed with them and taken captive by them. We're so busy, we don't have time to hear all of the voices that would be screaming at us. So sometimes we need to find the blessing even in the busyness. However, he continues, but after entering the monastic life, he's talking, I have seen these people who were so busy in the world, after entering the monastic life, in complete freedom from anxiety, they polluted themselves in a pitiful way by the movements of the body. In other words, they, yes, were free of those responsibilities and distractions, but then they were alone with their thoughts, and it drove them mad. And they had nothing else with which to resist. And so we must not think of the monastic life as a sort of cure-all, God forbid, an easy way out. It is particularly for God to give to each person their own calling. And yet, in chapter 3, I'm going to skip ahead because he talks about the different temptations. You know, pleasing your parents. If you're a monk, you know, your parents don't want you to go. They weep and you're tempted to stay. But in the end, he speaks of dreams that beginners have. And beginners in a monastery, in a monastic setting. He says, a dream is a movement of the mind while the body is at rest, and a fantasy is an illusion of the eyes when the intellect is asleep. A fantasy is an ecstasy of the mind when the body is awake. A fantasy is a vision of something that does not exist in reality. And these are the thoughts that can come to us whether we are in a monastery or in the world. The demons will come with thoughts. In Greek, this is a logismos, or logismi in plural. Thoughts or fantasies or images, temptations that cause us to seek out that which is not reality, that which is not true, that which would cause us to turn our eyes away from what we have been given directly in front of us in reality. The demons, he says in section 28, of vainglory prophesy in dreams. Being unscrupulous, they guess the future and foretell it to us. So these are the temptations, that it will all be better if I just change this. And yet, St. Anthony, the heavenly patron of our parish church, says that wherever you are, do not easily leave that place. And so for us, detachment from these tempting things. I want this. I'll be happy if only I get that. If only I improve this. If only my spouse or my children or my job or something were better or different or gone or whatever. But we are called to detach from that and simply with apathia to engage the reality that is in front of us so that we will be able to do that work with stability and dependability and patience. So may the Lord God bless us as we continue through our time in the ladder of divine ascent. Lord willing, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.